Hello and welcome to this presentation on oral skills. Before I start, I have to apologize for my voice quality today. I've had a cold lately, so I'm a little bit scruffy, but I will try to compensate by speaking clearly. Today I'm going to talk about the phenomenon oral skills. What are they? And then I will go on to say a few words about the English subject curriculum and what it has to say about oral skills. Then I will reflect on some teaching issues related to the subject curriculum, and finally I will talk a little bit about some oral activities that you can use in the classroom. Now, if we start with point number one, I think it's relevant to refer you here to the Common European Framework of Reference. We've talked about this document before, this huge framework document developed by the Council of Europe, which has been used as a basis for developing subject curricula in a number of different countries. It has been very influential in Norway as well. And it provides us with some very interesting theoretical perspectives on teaching and learning languages. And as you may remember, one of the things that the framework does is to provide us with scales for describing proficiency. For example, such as in this case, there is a scale for self-assessment of speaking skills, and I'm not going to go into details, but as you may remember, these different scales, they describe proficiency from the lowest level, A1, which is beginner, to the highest, which is C2. So there are a total of 6 different levels, and here I've picked out the 2 beginner levels, A1 and A2. And the interesting thing about oral skills, or speaking skills as the framework calls it, is that it divides speaking skills into spoken production and spoken interaction. So it's not just about speaking, it is in fact also about having a conversation. Moreover, the Common European Framework of Reference, it has a description of qualitative aspects of spoken language use, which is also interesting in terms of how we can understand speaking. So this scale, which also goes from A1 to C2, and here I've just picked A1, the interesting thing is that it divides speaking into 5 different components, starting with range, which is basically about, or largely about, vocabulary, as it says for the A1 level here, has a very basic repertoire of words and simple phrases related to personal details. Then it has a component called accuracy, which relates to, among other things, grammatical proficiency. So in this case, at the lowest level, shows only limited control of a few grammatical structures. Next comes fluency, which here is described as can manage very short, isolated, mainly pre-packaged utterances of phrases like good morning, how do you do, I would like some milk please, using pre-packaged structures. The next component has to do with, again, spoken interaction, conversation, for example. Can ask and answer questions about personal details. And finally, can link words or groups of words together with very basic linear connectives. And this is also an interesting point in the sense that connectives are adverbs such as moreover, however, nevertheless, which connect sentences together. And basic linear connectives will be, for example, but or and. they connect utterances and sentences together. So all these things that make up, all these different components make up the speaking construct, as we call it. A couple of points should be kept in mind here. First of all, listening, as I mentioned, is then seen as part of speaking. So it's not just production, it's about reception. Secondly, the idea of speaking is connected to the notion of communicative competence, which is very, very central in the Common European Framework of Reference and also in the notion in the English subject curriculum. So communicative competence then is defined as grammatical competence, word, vocabulary, grammar and pronunciation, for example. Secondly, social linguistic competence, such as the knowledge of politeness conventions, that there are different forms of politeness in the UK and in Norway, for example. And finally, pragmatic competence, which has to do with this idea of using connectives, for example, or connecting utterances and sentences together. And also, pragmatic competence has to do with the use of language functions or the knowledge of language functions, such as to describe and explain and ask questions, different types of functions of language. I will get back to this. Thirdly, it's important to notice, and this is also relevant for the Norwegian curriculum or the English curriculum in Norway, that there is this strong focus on what learners can do with the language, what they're able to carry out using language. Are they able to order plane tickets? Are they able to negotiate a contract? Are they able to explain their inner feelings? These different types of functions again. But it should also be pointed out here that the framework, as you will see when you start reading it, was originally meant for adults. Now you can have a look at the curriculum. I've listed the URL at the end of the document, so you can click there and you can read it. And if you want to go to those specific pages or those specific scales that I showed you, they can be found on pages 25 and the following. So, and then we talk about pragmatic competence. Pragmatic competence relates to ability to use language in different language functions. And the Common European Framework of Reference lists a number of functions. For example, description, be able to describe; narration, be able to tell a story or to tell others about yourself, for example. To make comments, to explain factual text, exposition, and then there are all these different functions down here. Now, we cannot expect, of course, that pupils in primary school are able to use argumentation and persuasion to a large extent in English, but I think it's important for you to keep this at the back of your minds, that this is how language development is understood in the framework and also to a large extent in the Norwegian curriculum, or the English subject curriculum. So we need to keep this at the back of our minds, that we want them to be able to perform different types of functions with language. And this, of course, is also important when we create tasks. What is the purpose of the task? What is the pupil supposed to be able to do in the different tasks that they're doing? Then let's move on to the Norwegian Framework for Basic Skills, Rammeverket for grunnleggende ferdigheter, which was relaunched in October 2017 in a new version. And the Framework for Basic Skills is important because, as you know, the basic skills are important in all subjects, and these are sort of the fundamental skills that are needed in order to develop pupils' knowledge in different subjects. And you also know already that oral skills are a basic skill. So according to the framework for basic skills, oral skills involve the ability to create meaning through listening, spoken production, and spoken interaction. Again, listening is a part of it, production is a part of it, and interaction is a part of it. It means being able to perform different speech acts. Again, you can see the similarity with the framework. What can the students do with language? And to coordinate verbal and other sub-skills. So actually, it's not just about words. It can also be non-verbal communication, this ability to coordinate, for example, verbal and non-verbal communication, body language, for example. It also means being able to listen to others and to be conscious of the interlocutor, the conversation partner, when speaking. Secondly, the framework for basic skills says oral skills are a prerequisite, a condition for exploratory conversations where we create and share knowledge with each other. And finally, oral skills are a prerequisite for lifelong learning and for active participation in working life and in society in a reflective and critical way. So this again underscores the importance of oral skills as a condition for developing learning outcomes. Now you can click the link there and you can read the Norwegian original. I highly recommend you to do so. Now let's move on to the subject curriculum. And the subject curriculum is divided into 4 main areas, as you know, and one of these areas is oral communication. So the main subject area, oral communication, deals with understanding and using the English language by listening, speaking, conversing, and applying suitable communication strategies. So again, it's the same thing: listening, spoken production, spoken interaction, and in addition to this, suitable communication strategies. Very important point, which I will return to presently. The main subject area involves developing a vocabulary and using idiomatic structures and grammatical patterns when speaking and conversing. So this, of course, emphasizes the importance of vocabulary as the perhaps most central element in communication, that you need a good vocabulary in order to communicate well. But also using idiomatic structures, also interesting in the sense that this focuses on accuracy. So this is something that we want to develop in students, using accurate grammatical or sentence structures. And it also covers learning to speak clearly and to use the correct intonation. In this case, I definitely agree that learning to speak clearly is extremely important. When it comes to using the correct intonation, however, I think that is a very problematic part of the curriculum. Not because intonation is not important, but because there are so many different intonations out there. There are so many different varieties of English. And how can you say that one intonation pattern is correct? Actually, if you look at the Norwegian original text, go and look at the Norwegian original text, and there is no talk of correct intonation there. So there is something wrong here with the translation. Okay. Then, now let's take a look at the competence aims. I have then picked the aims after year 4, just at random, but they're interesting in the sense that we recognize the same elements that we've talked about so far. One of the competence aims says, use simple listening and speaking strategies. So again, communication strategies are important. Secondly, listen to and understand the meaning of words and expressions based on the context they are used in. So the context is important for communication. Thirdly, understand and use English words, expressions and sentence patterns related to one's needs and feelings, daily life, leisure time and own interests. The point here about personal interest, personal life, immediate context of the student is something I'll also mention later. Fourthly, to understand the main content of nursery rhymes, word games, songs, fairy tales and stories. This is also an interesting point in the sense that the curriculum doesn't say too much about content, but here we find specific references to what pupils are supposed to learn or to know something about. Next, use some polite expressions and simple phrases to obtain help in understanding and being understood. Now this fits very well with the notion of communicative competence in the Common European Framework of Reference. As you mentioned there, communicative competence is about grammatical competence, social linguistic competence, and pragmatic competence. And polite expressions have to do with social linguistic competence. To know that, for example, in Britain, people are much more likely to use please and thank you and I'm sorry and pardon and so on. Then participate in everyday conversations related to local surroundings and own experiences. Again, the idea that speaking is about conversation is important. And also here comes this idea of personal interest, the immediate surroundings, local surroundings, and so on. Thirdly, be able to repeat the English alphabet and spell names and hometown. Now this is fine because this is a very concrete competence aim. Now some of these competence aims are very overall and quite vague, so you need to make them concrete for your learners. You need to operationalize them, as we say. But in this case, this competence aim is so straightforward that you can use it directly with your pupils. And finally, understand and use English words and expressions related to prices, quantities, shapes and size when communicating about one's daily life, leisure time and own interests. So here we see another basic skill, namely numeracy, which of course is relevant for many subjects. So it's integrated into the English subject curriculum as well. Okay, then I'd like to reflect on some of these points in relation to teaching and what is important for teaching oral skills or help pupils develop their oral skills. When it comes to speaking, Munden talks about the importance of meaningful communication, and she quotes Hughes, who says that activities are meaningful if they have real outcomes for the learner, real contexts, links to their own understanding and interaction with the world, and a real need or motivation in taking part in the activity. You can find the quote on page 209 in Munden. And the important point about this quote is that it stresses the importance of making communication meaningful. So not just putting up, tables with verb conjugations or how to decline nouns, etc., but that they can use the language in meaningful contexts. Secondly, there is research showing that as much as 70% of speaking activities in the classroom or speaking in the classroom is done by the teacher. So the teacher accounts for 70% of speaking. Now this of course depends on the level. With beginners, it's natural that the teacher has to speak a lot because the pupils normally don't have a vocabulary to speak. So that's natural. But Munden again stresses the importance of teachers not talking too much. And of course she's writing about the upper levels of the primary school. She's talking about the 5th to the 7th grade. But I think it's important to keep this in mind that when it comes to oral activities, it's important that the students or the pupils actually get to speak. So that's why she says that the teacher can be there as a storyteller to provide input. He or she can be the instructor to tell the pupils what kind of activities and what kind of learning goals, and also as a facilitator to make the learning process easier for the pupils. And then I said something about the focus on personal interest and familiar contexts, which is there in the curriculum. Now Munden also says that a familiar topic could be one that pupils have become familiar with after working with it at school. So don't be afraid to think that, oh no, I can't use Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or I can't use Tracy Beaker, because that's not familiar to them. Of course, that can be familiar to them. So the notion of familiar topics is a very broad one. When it comes to listening then, and here I quote another teaching specialist, Anna Maria Pinter, who says that it's easier to listen to the teacher than to recordings, because teachers can adjust the speed of their speech and modify their language. Now both recordings and teacher talk are very important. But some teachers and teaching specialists are very, very concerned with authentic language. So they want to use as many recordings as possible, or as much, online resources with authentic spoken language. But don't be afraid of speaking yourselves. You will provide important input, and also the fact that you can adjust a little bit more to their level. That's extremely important. Also, the idea of total physical response, as we've talked about previously, this notion of the pupils using body language to communicate. This, according to Pinter, helps pupils make sense of the content of what is being said. And related to this, in point number 3 here, a useful task is to listen to rhymes or action stories or songs and enjoy them by miming the actions rather than immediately producing the language. Now we're talking about the youngest learners, but this of course is important and something that many of you I assume have experienced. So for example, you use rhymes, the chants or games like this, clap your hands and you let the pupils perform. This is what Munden and Myhre refer to as learning by doing or playing. So clap your hands together, stamp your feet together, and you let them do this. So you provide more input than actually output here. Then there is something in the curriculum about communication strategies or learning strategies or speaking strategies. And I've taken this quote from Munden because I think it's interesting. Munden says that I've heard teachers say that their pupils don't know enough English to do communicative activities. But this can't be right. For one thing, pupils are at school to learn. So if they don't know enough English to do a particular activity, teach them the language that they will need. And I really like this because it's easy to think, oh, and the pupils sometimes they complain and say, this is too difficult. And, well, just trying to help them out then. Give them some phrases they can use to use the language. And also, I would add, teach them learning strategies and teach them speaking strategies. Now, there are many types of learning strategies, but one of the main points is that you make the pupils conscious. You make them aware of their own learning. How do I learn best? What am I going to do to learn things? And in that connection, it's important that you clarify the goal for them. You specify the goal, write the goal on the whiteboard. This is what we're going to be working with. This is what you're going to learn. So I've taken a very banal example. Learn the days of the week. Now, probably you won't need to write the goal on the blackboard or a whiteboard for pupils to learn this, but just as an example. Okay, so you put the goal on the whiteboard or make it clear to them on their weekly schedule, for example, their work plan. And then you clarify the task. For example, how are we going to learn this? Well, we're going to learn this by singing this song. You can you can check this later on. I'll post the PowerPoint in Canvas, so you can click on this one. There's a YouTube clip just to show. And then in the next phase, when they have done the task, you have to do it again and again, of course, but when they've done it, you work with the task, and afterwards comes the important phase. You have a reflective summing up. Go back to the starting point. What was the goal? Well, we were going to learn the days of the week. Okay, what did we do to do that, to learn this? Well, we sang this song. Okay, so have you learnt the days of the week? And perhaps just as importantly, when you start with the young learners, we're now talking first, second grade, did you like the task? Did you like it? And then you can ask them to provide a smiley. Well, not really. Oh yeah, I liked it. And the thing is now to get them to think like this from early on. You don't have to provide smileys all the time or ask those specific questions, but to reflect on the principle is to reflect on the goal. What was I going to learn? And what did I do to learn it? And thirdly, was this successful? So once they get to the higher levels, they can start thinking for themselves. When they get a task, okay, we're going to learn about fairy tales as a genre. Now you are going to write a little essay at the end or a report at the end. What characterizes the genre of fairy tales? And then in the second point, or the third point, what kind of a task should you choose? Should you choose tasks? Should you go to the internet to find some fairy tales, or should you read the book, or should you talk to the teacher, or should you cooperate with your peers, or what should you do? So the point is to make them conscious of what kind of tasks, what kind of processes are relevant for learning these new things. As for speaking strategies, Munden mentions a number of them. And I think it's very important that you introduce these strategies to your pupils early. Munden mentions, for example, teach them to take the initiative. I'm going to take the initiative. I'm going to speak now. And tell them that taking chances is okay. Taking chances is fine. Remember that everybody makes mistakes. Now this point, of course, also relates to the importance of a good classroom environment. And I'm quite sure that most of you now know more about classroom management than I do. But I have seen teachers out there who don't stop pupils who laugh at other pupils. I've seen teachers who don't stop pupils making negative comments about other pupils. This is something that you must do. You must stop negative reactions in the classroom like this. To create a good environment means that everyone should be allowed to try. No one should laugh at others. Everyone should feel safe. So this then relates to classroom management strategies that you as a teacher must have. Yeah, a third strategy that mentions is say it in a different way if you get stuck. Try to put it differently. Or try to relax. An easy thing to say, of course, but you know, to work on these different types of strategies. Use chunks that you already know. Ask questions. Ask the teacher. Ask your fellow student. What is this word what is tärning in English? You know, make them speak and make them try. Use gestures. Non-verbal communication. Finally, no, yeah, and then, sorry, I'm sorry, it's nothing serious, it's just tuberculosis. Munden mentions, she says at the beginning, I said there at the beginning there, teach them the language that they will need. And then Munden mentions in, yeah, sorry, I forgot the page reference here, but you mentioned somewhere in the book, you can give them phrases or chunks or collocations that they can memorize to help them speak. I would like to talk about my dog. Sorry to interrupt, but can I say something? So give them these phrases to help them develop a repertoire for talking. Okay, finally, just quickly say a few words about activities. I have put up a list of sources or references at the end where you can click in and get some more specific activities. I'm quite sure that some of you have many more activities than I can provide you with. So the important thing here for me is to put this in a more theoretical perspective and to show you what's important in the curriculum and what research says about teaching speaking. But when it comes to teaching oral skills to young learners, most teaching specialists would agree that there should mainly be a focus on how to say things, to use different structures, to learn how to pronounce words. So it's more about the how than the what should be said. And also, as I've already talked about, there should be emphasis on what the pupils can do with words. And similarly, teaching them collocations and chunks so that they learn how to use phrases. And then there are many different types of activities. And as I just showed you, the curriculum already mentioned some songs and rhymes and stories and yeah, etc. So and this is something you can find in the references, these activities here. What's the time, Mr. Wolf? Mr. Wolf is this type of activity where one pupil stands with his face turned against the wall, and the others are standing behind. They go to a line at the other end of the room, or outside if they're outside, and the one pupil who's Mr. Wolf standing with his or her face against the wall, back against the others, and then the other pupils start chanting, "What time is it, Mr. Wolf?" And they start advancing against him, and he or she turns around and he says, "It's 3 o'clock." So they have to stop. And then he turns back towards the wall and they go again, "What time is it, Mr. Wolf?" And he goes, "It's 5 o'clock." He turns around, he says, "It's 5 o'clock." And they have to stand still. And it goes like this until the pupils are very close. And when they're very close, the wolf, Mr. Wolf, will turn around again and he will say, "It's dinner time!" And he can start chasing the others back to the line. So if he or she catches the pupil, this pupil who gets caught will have to be Mr. Wolf. Yeah, and then there is I spy with my little eye. I'm sure you know it already. This is about, using letters to form words. I spy with my little eye a word starting with S, and others have to guess. Okay, sun or shy or whatever it is. Then there is Simon Says, Kongen befaler. I'm sure you know this already. And then there is Pictionary, which is which means that the pupil, one pupil gets a word from the teacher. It could be a group of 4 or 5. One pupil gets a word from the teacher, not too difficult, and then the pupil has to draw the word, and the other pupils must guess what is it. Is it a stone? Is it a ball? And they try to guess the correct word. Okay, I'm not going too much into this. You can find more resources at the end. But just for activities with older learners, when you get to the 5th, 6th and 7th grade, there should be more focus on what to say. But also keeping a focus on how to say things, but also on what to say. And then you can use, of course, a number of different activities. One activity taken here is role play. You can have these cards, you can cut them, and they can work in pairs, for example. One of the pupils is given this card. You wake up in the middle of the night and your neighbor's house is on fire. Call emergency services and ask them for the fire brigade. And the other pupil, answer the phone and find out information about the emergency. Respond to the emergency. Now you can cut this and you can distribute to different pupils. Okay, I'll try to keep my online lectures short. I'm sorry about all the time this takes, but this is what I got for you. Finally, I think it's nice to sum up with Nations for Principles, about meaning focus input and meaning focus output. And finally, fluency development, which of course also relates to output as important principles of teaching and learning. Okay, that's all I had for now. You can find the resources here. I'll post this PowerPoint in Canvas, and you can also find the references there, particularly the framework for basic skills. Okay, thank you very much.